bag of sand slammed into the side of a man's head. He hit the dirt face first. Mud filled his mouth. A boot pressed down on his back before he could get up. Laughter. Not one voice. At least a dozen. All of them in uniform. The man on the ground wasn't small. He was thick, strong. Years of training showed in every part of him. But out here, none of that mattered. Because this wasn't a movie set. This was a U.S. Army training course. And the man spitting mud out of his teeth was Sylvester Stallone. The same guy who played Rocky. The same guy who played Rambo. And right now, a group of real soldiers had just made him eat dirt in front of everyone. What Stallone did over the next 48 hours turned every single one of those men silent. Stay with me on this one. Now let me back this up. Because you need to understand how Sylvester Stallone ended up face down in Army mud in the first place. It was the mid-1980s. Stallone was at the top. Rocky had already made him one of the biggest stars on the planet. First Blood turned him into an action icon. Studios were throwing money at him. He could have done anything, gone anywhere. But Stallone had a problem. And the problem was this: he didn't feel like he'd earned it. See, Stallone never served. He knew that. And every time he put on a costume and played a soldier or a fighter, something sat wrong in his gut. He once said in an interview that the hardest part of playing Rambo wasn't the stunts. It was looking real veterans in the eye at premieres and knowing they'd done the thing he was only pretending to do. So when pre-production started on the next project, Stallone made a call. Not to his agent. Not to a studio executive. He called the Department of Defense and asked for access to a real Army training program. Not a tour. Not a weekend ride-along with cameras. He wanted the full thing. The real schedule. The real conditions. No special treatment. Now here's the thing. The Army said yes. But not because they liked him. They said yes because having a celebrity go through the program was good publicity. The brass figured he'd last 2 days, shake some hands, and they'd get a photo op out of it. Stallone showed up at Fort Benning, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning. He came alone. One duffel bag. No assistant. No trainer. No publicist. Just him and a bag of clothes. The soldiers who saw him walk through the gate didn't cheer. They stared. A few of them laughed before he even set his bag down. The man waiting for him was Staff Sergeant Dale Harding. Harding was career infantry, 16 years in, 2 combat deployments, a face like a cinder block and a voice that could strip paint. He ran the training program the way he ran everything. Hard, loud, and without a single ounce of patience for anything he considered soft. And in Harding's mind, Stallone was the softest thing that had ever walked onto his course. Harding didn't shake his hand, didn't welcome him. The first thing he said, right there in front of 30 soldiers, was this: "You're not Rocky here. You're not Rambo. You're nothing here. You are a body that takes orders. And if you can't handle that, the gate's right behind you." Stallone said nothing, just stood there, took it. Harding assigned him to a squad. Not just any squad, the toughest one. The group known for washing out the weakest recruits first. Stallone got the heaviest rucksack. The worst bunk right next to the latrine. Every small decision Harding made was designed to send a message. You don't belong here. The soldiers in his squad didn't help. Within the first hour, someone started calling him Hollywood. It stuck. Not as a joke. As an insult. Every time someone said it, there was an edge to it. Like they were daring him to react. Believe me, Stallone noticed. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what was happening. These men had given years of their lives to the military. They'd sweated and bled for something real. And now some actor worth $50 million walks in and wants to play soldier for a few weeks? To them, it was an insult. His presence alone felt like mockery. And Stallone understood that. He didn't argue. Didn't try to win anyone over with charm or stories about making movies. He just kept his mouth shut, picked up whatever they told him to pick up, and moved. But keeping quiet doesn't earn respect. Not here. In the Army, respect is physical. You earn it with your body, with what you can carry, how far you can run, how much pain you can swallow without making a sound. And Stallone, for all his gym training, was not a soldier. His body was built for cameras, for angles, for looking strong under studio lights. That's a very different thing from being strong in a swamp at 4 in the morning with 70 pounds on your back and a man screaming in your face. The first few days were brutal. Stallone kept up, but barely. He was always last. Always the one breathing hardest. Always the one Harding singled out for correction. And every time he fell behind, the word came again. Hollywood. 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 By the end of day 3, most of the soldiers had already made up their minds. He wouldn't last the week. Harding thought even less of him than that. He told another instructor within earshot of half the platoon, "Give him 2 more days. He'll call his driver." Stallone heard that too. He didn't say a word, but something in his face changed that night. Something set. The stakes were simple now. If he quit, he proved every one of them right. And Sylvester Stallone had built his entire life on refusing to do that. The obstacle course came on day 5. It was the centerpiece of the program. A brutal stretch of walls, ropes, trenches, and mud pits designed to break coordination and endurance at the same time. Every trainee had to run it, and every trainee was timed. Stallone lined up with his squad at 0500. The air was cold, wet, the kind of morning where your fingers don't work right and your lungs burn before you've taken 10 steps. Harding stood at the starting line with a stopwatch and a clipboard. He looked at Stallone the way a man looks at something he's already decided is a waste of his time. The whistle blew. Stallone hit the first wall hard, pulled himself up. His arms were strong enough, but his grip slipped on the wet wood. He fell, got back up, fell again. Soldiers ahead of him were already through the rope climb by the time he cleared the second wall. The mud trench was next. Belly down, elbows dragging, face inches from standing water. Stallone's chest scraped over rocks he couldn't see. His shirt tore. Blood mixed with mud along his ribs, and he kept crawling. He finished the course last. Dead last. His time was nearly double the average. Harding wrote it down without looking at him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came that evening. Harding called a full formation in the common area. Every soldier, every trainee, every instructor. He stood in front of them with a television set wheeled in on a metal cart. Nobody knew what was happening. Then Harding pressed play. It was a clip from Rocky. The training montage. Rocky running up the steps. Rocky punching meat. Rocky doing one-arm push-ups in a basement. The music swelling. The crowd in the movie cheering. Harding let it play for about 45 seconds. Then he paused it, turned to the room, and said, "This is what Hollywood thinks a soldier looks like." The room erupted. Laughter. Not the nervous kind. The cruel kind. The kind that comes when people have been given permission to let loose something they've been holding back. Stallone was standing in the 3rd row. He didn't move, didn't look down, didn't smile, just stood there and took every second of it. Harding wasn't done. He pointed at the frozen screen. That man ran up some steps and the whole world called him a hero. You men run 10 miles before breakfast and nobody knows your name. So let's be clear about what's real and what's pretend. Now here's what you need to understand. Harding wasn't being evil. In his mind, he was protecting something. The integrity of the uniform. The seriousness of what these men did. And Stallone, to him, was a walking insult to all of it. A man who got rich playing dress-up while real soldiers came home in boxes. Was he wrong? Maybe. Maybe not. But he believed it. And belief is enough to make a man ruthless. That night, Stallone walked back to his bunk and found something taped to the frame. A movie poster. Rocky. Someone had printed it and written one word across it in thick black marker. Quitter. Stallone stood there for a long time, just looking at it. A few soldiers nearby were watching, waiting to see what he'd do, waiting for the explosion, the tantrum, the call to his people back in Los Angeles. He pulled the poster off the wall, folded it once, set it on his footlocker, and went to bed. At 3:30 the next morning, before the sun came up, before reveille, before anyone else on the base had opened their eyes, Stallone was outside, alone, running the obstacle course. Not the short version, the full course, in the dark, with no one watching and no one timing him. He hit the wall, fell, got back up, hit it again, fell again, got back up. He did this over and over until his hands were raw and his knees were bleeding through his pants. Then he moved to the rope climb, then the trench, then the sprint. By the time the first soldiers came out for morning formation, Stallone was sitting on a bench near the barracks. Muddy, bleeding, breathing hard. He didn't say a word to anyone, just fell in line when the whistle blew. Harding noticed. He didn't say anything either, but he noticed. The days kept going. Stallone stopped finishing last. He wasn't first, wasn't even close to first, but he was no longer the man everyone expected to quit by lunch. He completed every drill, every run, every exercise, quietly, without complaint, without asking for a break or a modification or a shorter route. The insults slowed down, not because anyone respected him yet, but because the joke was getting old. You can only call a man Hollywood so many times before it stops being funny, especially when that man keeps showing up every morning covered in mud and blood and doesn't say a thing about it. By the end of the first week, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way you could point to and say, there, that's the moment. It was quieter than that. Harding stopped singling him out in front of the group. The soldiers in his squad stopped going out of their way to make things harder. Stallone ate alone in the mess hall, completed his drills in silence, went to bed early, woke up before everyone. He was tolerated. That's the best word for it. Not respected, not accepted, just tolerated. The way you tolerate a stray dog that keeps showing up at your door. You stop kicking it, but you don't let it inside either. And for a few days that seemed like enough. The worst appeared to be over. Harding had made his point. The soldiers had gotten their laughs. Stallone had survived the gauntlet without breaking. Things were settling into a rhythm. Quiet, predictable, almost calm. Stallone even started to relax. Just slightly. You could see it in the way he sat at meals. The way his shoulders dropped half an inch. The way he stopped flinching every time someone walked past his bunk. It looked like the hard part was done. It wasn't. On day 9, Harding called everyone to the briefing tent. He had a map pinned to a board and a look on his face that said this wasn't going to be a normal day. Live tactical exercise, he said. 48 hours. Simulated combat scenario. You work in 4-man fire teams. You navigate to your objective, complete the mission, extract to the rally point. No breaks. No excuses. You perform or you fail. And if your team fails, every man on it fails. He read out the team assignments. When he got to Stallone's name, he paused, looked down at his clipboard, then read 3 other names. Corporal Egan, Private Dawes, Private First Class Torrio. Every one of those men had been vocal about Stallone. Egan was the one who'd put the poster on his bunk. Dawes had started the Hollywood nickname. Torrio hadn't said much, but he didn't need to. The look he gave Stallone every time they crossed paths said everything. Harding knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't random. This was a test. Maybe for Stallone. Maybe for all of them. Maybe Harding just wanted to see what would break first. The teams moved out at dusk. Full packs. Weapons with blank rounds. Radios. 2 canteens of water each and nothing else. The route was 12 miles through dense woodland, swamp, and open terrain with simulated enemy positions along the way. Stallone's team didn't speak to him. Not one word. They walked in formation and he was always at the back. When they stopped to check the map, the 3 of them huddled together and didn't invite him in. When they made tactical decisions, they decided among themselves and simply expected him to follow. Stallone followed. He didn't push, didn't argue, just kept pace and kept quiet. Then, for hours it happened. They reached a creek crossing. Waist-deep water, fast current, loose rocks on the bottom. Egan went first. Dawes followed. Torrio crossed third. Stallone started across last. And when he looked up on the other side, the 3 of them were gone. Not ahead on the trail. Gone. They had deliberately taken a different route and left him. Alone. In the dark. In the middle of a simulated combat zone with no map, no team, and no idea where the objective was. Now here's where it turns. Because this wasn't just about pride anymore. This was a graded tactical exercise. Stallone had a radio. He could call for help, call an instructor, report that his team had abandoned him. It would have been the right call by any military standard. No one would have blamed him. He looked at the radio, held it in his hand for a long time. Then he clipped it back to his vest and started walking. Stallone navigated alone through the woods for the next 6 hours. No map, no compass beyond the stars. He used what he'd learned in the previous 9 days. Terrain reading, noise discipline, shadow movement. Things he'd picked up not because anyone taught him directly, but because he'd been paying attention every single minute he'd been on that base. He found the objective, a marked position on a ridge overlooking a simulated enemy camp. The mission was to observe, record enemy positions, and extract without being detected. Stallone did it, alone. He set up a concealed observation point, logged what he saw, and began his extraction toward the rally point. He arrived at the rally point 11 minutes before the deadline. Muddy, exhausted, dehydrated. But there, Egan, Dawes, and Torrio were already waiting. They'd completed their own version of the mission. When they saw Stallone walk out of the tree line, the look on their faces wasn't anger. It was something closer to disbelief. They had expected him to call it in, to quit, to use the radio and report them. That was the whole point of leaving him. Force him to break. Force him to prove he didn't belong. He didn't break. Harding was at the rally point. He'd been monitoring everything by radio. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew the team had split. He knew Stallone had been abandoned. And he knew Stallone hadn't called for help. Harding failed the entire team. Not Stallone. The team. All 4 of them. Egan, Dawes, and Torrio lost their marks for the exercise. The reason Harding gave was simple. A team that abandons a man is not a team. You failed the mission the moment you crossed that creek without your 4th. If you've been with me this far, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Because this story isn't done yet. Not even close. Egan was furious. He got in Stallone's face that night in the barracks. Close enough that their noses nearly touched. "This is on you," he said. "Everything about this is on you. You don't belong here and now you're dragging us down with you." Stallone looked at him. Didn't step back. Didn't raise his hands. Just said very quietly, "I finished the mission. Did you finish yours?" Egan didn't swing. But the veins in his neck were pulsing and his fists were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Torrio pulled him back. Not out of kindness. Out of calculation. Hitting Stallone would mean discharge. And Egan knew it. But something had changed in the room. Because every other soldier in that barracks had heard what Stallone said. And every one of them knew it was true. He'd been abandoned in the field. Left alone without a map or a team in the middle of the night. And he'd completed the objective anyway. Without calling for help. Without reporting his teammates. Without saying a single word about it until Egan forced the conversation. The men who had laughed at him on day 1 weren't laughing now. They weren't cheering either. But the silence was different. It was the kind of silence that comes right before people start changing their minds. The final assessment started on day 12. 48 hours. No sleep. No stopping. The single hardest stretch of the entire program, designed to push every man past whatever wall he thought was his limit. It started with a 15-mile forced march at full load. Rucksack, weapon, helmet, boots that had already chewed blisters into every man's feet by this point in the course. Then a live navigation course through terrain so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Then a series of team challenges. Rope bridges, casualty carries, trench construction under simulated fire. One task after another with no rest between them. Stallone was in a new team now. Harding had reassigned him after the tactical exercise. The men in this squad hadn't gone out of their way to mock him. They hadn't helped him either. They were neutral, watching, waiting to see what version of Stallone showed up when things got truly hard. The first 12 hours were manageable. Brutal but manageable. Stallone kept pace, didn't complain, carried his share. The men around him started doing something they hadn't done before. They started talking to him. Small things. Watch that root. There's a drop on your left. Hand me the rope. Nothing big, but real. Hour 18 was where bodies started failing. 2 men from another squad dropped out. A third was pulled by a medic after his knee buckled on a downhill stretch. The group was thinning. The ones still moving were running on something deeper than energy. Stubbornness. Pride. Fear of being the next one to fall. Hour 22. River crossing. This one was different from the creek during the tactical exercise. This was wider. Deeper. The current was strong enough to pull a man off his feet if he wasn't careful. They crossed in pairs, linked at the arms for stability. Stallone was near the middle of the line. The man next to him was Dawes. The same Private Dawes who had started calling him Hollywood on day 1. The same Dawes who had been part of the team that abandoned him in the woods. They hadn't spoken since that night in the barracks. They were halfway across when Dawes went down. His foot caught between 2 rocks under the water. His ankle twisted hard and he dropped. The current hit him immediately. His pack, waterlogged now, dragged him sideways. His head went under. Stallone grabbed him. One hand on the shoulder strap of his rucksack. The other hooked under his arm. The current was pulling them both. Stallone planted his feet and held. The water was chest high and moving fast, and every second he held on was a second he risked going under himself. Dawes came up coughing, spitting water, eyes wide. He tried to push Stallone off. Not because he was confused, because he was ashamed. He knew who was holding him. He knew what he'd done to this man, and he couldn't stand the idea that this man was now saving him. Stallone didn't let go. He pulled Dawes upright, got him steady. Then he reached down into the water, worked the rocks loose from around his ankle, and freed his foot. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. Felt like an hour. They made it to the far bank. Dawes collapsed on the mud, breathing hard, grabbing at his swollen ankle. It wasn't broken, but it was bad. Badly sprained. He couldn't carry his pack. Could barely walk. The smart move, the military move, was to call it in. Let the medics handle it. Nobody would have faulted Dawes for dropping out on a sprained ankle during the final assessment. Stallone didn't give him the chance. He picked up Dawes's rucksack, slung it over his own pack. 2 full loads now. One on his back, one on his chest. The weight was staggering. Believe me, every man watching knew what that felt like. Carrying your own pack for 48 hours was punishment enough. Carrying 2 was something most of them wouldn't have volunteered to do for a mile. Stallone carried both for the next 6 hours. He didn't say anything heroic. Didn't give a speech. Didn't even look at Dawes when he picked up the second pack. He just started walking. Dawes limped behind him, silent. The other men in the squad said nothing, but they adjusted their pace so Dawes could keep up. And one of them, without being asked, took Stallone's weapon so he could use both hands to steady the packs on his shoulders. The last 8 hours nearly finished Stallone. His legs were shaking. His back was seizing. His vision was blurred from exhaustion and dehydration. Every step was a negotiation between his body, which was begging him to stop, and something else. Something harder. Something that had been built over a lifetime of being told he wasn't enough and refusing to accept it. He made it. They all made it. Every man in that squad crossed the finish line before the clock ran out. Harding was standing at the final checkpoint, arms crossed, face unreadable. He watched the squad come in. Watched Stallone set down both packs. Watched Dawes limp in behind him. And then Harding did something no one in that company had ever seen him do. He walked up to Stallone, stood in front of him, and extended his hand. Not a salute, not a pat on the back. A handshake, eye to eye. The kind of gesture that means something between men who don't give them easily. Stallone shook his hand. That was it. No words. No ceremony. Just a handshake in the mud between 2 men who understood each other for the first time. The soldiers watching didn't cheer, didn't clap, but every single one of them saw it. And every single one of them understood what it meant. The man Harding had tried to break. The man they'd mocked and sabotaged and abandoned in the dark. That man had just carried one of their own across the finish line. And there was nothing left to say about it. The program ended on day 14. No graduation ceremony. No parade. Just a final formation at 0600 where Harding read out the names of every man who'd completed the course. When he got to Stallone's name, he didn't pause. Didn't add commentary. Just read it the same way he read every other name on the list. And that, more than anything, was the point. Stallone wasn't special anymore. He wasn't Hollywood. He was just another name on a list of men who'd made it through. The formation broke. Men started packing their gear, shaking hands, exchanging addresses. The quiet rituals that happen at the end of any shared suffering. When you've been through something that hard with a group of people, the ending always feels strange. Like stepping out of a dark room into daylight. Everything's too bright and too quiet and you're not sure what to do with your hands. Stallone packed his duffel in silence. The same bag he'd carried through the gate on day one. It was heavier now. Not because he'd added anything, but because the things inside it meant something different. The mud-stained shirts, the torn pants, the boots that had bled through twice and been taped together with medical wrap. These weren't costume pieces. They were evidence. He was sitting on his bunk, lacing those ruined boots for the last time, when Dawes walked over. The limp was still there. Would be for weeks. Dawes stood in front of him and didn't say anything for a long moment. The two men just looked at each other. Then Dawes reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. Small, bronze-colored, worn around the edges. A challenge coin. If you don't know what that is, let me explain. In the military, a challenge coin is one of the most personal tokens of respect one soldier can give another. It's not official. It's not regulation. You can't buy one that matters. It only means something when it's given by someone who earned it and who's decided you've earned it too. Dawes put the coin in Stallone's hand, closed his fingers around it, and said one sentence. "You didn't have to go back for me." Stallone looked at the coin, then at Dawes, and said, "Yeah, I did." That was the whole conversation. Dawes nodded once, turned around, and walked away. No hug, no long speech. Just two men who'd started as enemies and ended as something they'd probably never be able to name. Not friends exactly. Something rawer than that. Two people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen not to look away. Now here's what I find most interesting about this whole story. Stallone never talked about it. Not on talk shows. Not in magazine profiles. Not in the press tours for the film he made afterward. He didn't use it as a marketing hook. Didn't turn it into an anecdote for late-night television. The kind of story where the host laughs and the audience claps and everyone moves on to the next segment. He just kept it. Held it close. The way you hold something that changed you in a place you can't quite reach. The people around him noticed, though. The stunt coordinators on his next film said he moved differently. Not bigger. Not flashier. Quieter. More controlled. The actors who worked opposite him said there was something behind his eyes during certain scenes that hadn't been there before. A weight. Not sadness. Just weight. The kind that comes from knowing what something actually costs. Not movie costs. Real costs. Believe me, you can tell the difference between a man pretending to be tough and a man who's had his face pushed into the dirt and gotten back up. The camera sees it. The audience feels it. And Stallone carried that difference into every frame he shot after Fort Benning. There's something else worth saying. What Stallone did wasn't extraordinary by military standards. Soldiers do what he did every day. They carry each other's weight. They finish when their bodies tell them to stop. They endure humiliation from men who outrank them and they keep showing up the next morning. That's the job. That's what service is. What made Stallone's version of it matter was that he chose it. Nobody made him go. Nobody forced him to stay. He had a mansion and a film career and more money than those soldiers would see in a lifetime. He could have left at any moment and gone back to a world where people called him sir, and brought him coffee and told him he was great. He stayed in the mud instead. And that choice, that single, stubborn, relentless choice to stay when leaving was easy, that's the thing that turned those men around. Not talent, not charisma, not fame. Just the willingness to be bad at something in front of people who hated him and to keep going until he wasn't bad at it anymore. Think about that for a second. Think about the last time you stayed with something that hurt. Something where every voice around you said quit. Something where the smart move was to walk away and nobody would have blamed you. Stallone kept that challenge coin for years. Carried it in his pocket on film sets. Held it between takes when he needed to remember what was real. A small bronze circle worn smooth by a man's thumb. Given by a soldier who once left him alone in the dark and then watched him come back carrying someone else's weight. That's not a movie. That's not a script. That's just a man who decided that what other people thought of him mattered less than what he knew about himself. And he proved it the only way that counts. Not with words. With mud. With blood. With showing up before sunrise when nobody was watching. That's the whole story.